Welcome, traveler. As night deepens and the world slows its pace, let this story wrap gently around you. No need to think, just breathe, relax, and let go. Before you drift off, take a moment to like and subscribe. And if you'd like, leave a comment with the current time and where you're listening from. We'd love to know where in the world you are. Now, close your eyes. Let's begin. Tonight, the first topic we explore is the life and ideas of Albert Einstein, perhaps the most iconic physicist in modern history, a man whose wild hair and deep eyes became symbols of genius itself. From redefining our understanding of space and time to his quiet resistance against war and injustice. Einstein's life was filled with curiosity, rebellion, and moments of deep reflection. So, before you get comfortable, as always, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel only if you enjoy our content. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Sometimes our stories are too interesting and we're working on some boring ones. It's time now to dim the lights, turn on a fan for some noise, and let's cover what we have for tonight together. Albert Einstein was born on a quiet spring day, March 14, 1879, in the small German city of Ulm. He was not born into grandeur or wealth, but into the hum of ordinary life. His father, Hermann, was an engineer, and his mother, Pauline, was a gifted pianist. Their home was filled with a gentle mix of tools and melodies, science and art, an atmosphere that would quietly shape the boy who would one day change how we understand the universe. From the very beginning, Albert was different, not in the way people might expect genius to show itself. He was slow to speak. Some in his family feared he never would. He often repeated sentences softly to himself under his breath, as if trying to make sense of the words before releasing them into the world. But what he lacked in speech, he made up for in stillness, an intense, quiet curiosity that seemed to absorb everything around him. One day, when he was about 5 years old and homesick in bed, his father gave him a simple gift to cheer him up. A pocket compass, just a tiny object with a small needle suspended in a glass case. But for Albert, it was a moment of revelation. He held the compass in his small hand, tilted it, turned it, studied it. No matter what he did, the needle moved, always pointing north. Something invisible was moving it, something he couldn't see or touch or hear, but something that was there. He became obsessed. How could the needle know which way was north? What force could reach across space and command it like that? The mystery burrowed into his young mind and never left. Later, Einstein would call this his first wonder. The moment he realized that the universe had laws, patterns, secrets, and he wanted to spend his life uncovering them. That compass didn't just point north, it pointed forward. It was the beginning of a journey that would carry Einstein across continents, through revolutions in thought, and into the minds of generations to come. Long before chalkboards and equations, it all began with a boy, a fever, and a tiny needle dancing in still air. Albert Einstein's early school years were anything but brilliant. In fact, if you had been one of his teachers, you might never have guessed you were looking at a future icon of genius. He didn't behave poorly, but he didn't exactly follow the rules either. He didn't sit up straight with excitement. He didn't memorize the answers like the others. What he did, often quietly, inwardly, was think. He would let his mind wander. And in classrooms where conformity was king, that made him a misfit. In late 19th century Germany, the school system was strict, even militaristic. Lessons were rigid. Students recited by rote. Creativity was not rewarded, it was discouraged. But Albert was not interested in memorizing what others had already discovered. He wanted to understand the why. Why did light behave the way it did? Why was the sky blue? Why did time feel slower when you were bored and faster when you were playing? These weren't questions that earned you gold stars. They earned you raised eyebrows. His teachers, frustrated with his questions and quiet resistance, often saw him as defiant. One famously told him he would never amount to anything. Another asked him to leave school altogether. But at home, Einstein was a different student. He devoured books on his own, books about physics, mathematics, and philosophy. He discovered Euclidean geometry before most of his classmates had even heard the word theorem. At the age of 12, he began teaching himself algebra and calculus. Not for grades, not for praise, just for the sheer joy of unraveling the universe. He also found peace in music. His mother, Pauline, had introduced him to the violin early on. At first, he resisted it, but as he grew older, music became a refuge. He loved Mozart most of all. Playing the violin calmed him, gave him rhythm when the world felt chaotic. He once said that if he hadn't been a physicist, he might have become a musician. So, while the classroom tried to box him in, Albert quietly made his own world. A world filled with questions, symbols, silence, and sound. He wasn't failing. He was just waiting for the right kind of challenge. And soon, it would arrive. By the time Albert Einstein finished his studies at the Polytechnic Institute in Zurich, he had the knowledge, but not the path. The world didn't seem to know what to do with him. He graduated without distinction, without glowing letters of recommendation. His professors didn't quite know how to categorize him. He was brilliant, yes, but unconventional, stubborn, and always questioning. He applied for teaching positions across Europe, rejected again and again. At times, it seemed as though no one wanted him. For over 2 years, Einstein drifted in what he later called his wasted years. But they weren't wasted. Not really. They were the quiet before the storm, the waiting period before genius would be ready to speak. Eventually, a friend helped him secure a job at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern, not as a physicist, not even as a teacher. He was a clerk. He reviewed patent applications for electromagnetic devices and small mechanical inventions. It was far from glamorous, but it was stable. And more importantly, it was quiet. That silence gave him space. While others saw a dull government job, Einstein saw opportunity. The work was mechanical and repetitive, but that left his mind free. He used scraps of paper and the backs of applications to scribble ideas. He took long walks along the Aare River, thinking through puzzles most people never even asked. And late at night, after returning to his modest apartment, he'd continue to dream. No laboratory, no team, just Albert, his thoughts, and the ticking clock. During this time, he also fell in love with Mileva Maric, a fellow physics student from Zurich. Their relationship was passionate but complicated. They would eventually marry, and their union would bear children, but also deep strain. Einstein was still searching for himself, still becoming who he would one day be. And marriage, for all its comfort, added new pressures. But through it all, one thing remained constant: Albert's obsession with light. He imagined riding on a beam of light, wondering what the world would look like from that impossible perspective. That single thought, born in obscurity, shaped during his lonely patent office years, would soon unlock one of the greatest revolutions in human thought. The world didn't see him yet, but he was almost ready. The year was 1905. Albert Einstein was 26 years old, working full-time at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. By day, he reviewed designs for inventions. By night, he turned to the questions that haunted him. And that year, quietly, without fanfare, he rewrote the laws of physics. Historians call it his annus mirabilis, his miracle year. In the span of just 12 months, Einstein published 4 scientific papers. Not forgettable footnotes, not minor tweaks. Each paper fundamentally altered how we understand reality. The first paper explained the photoelectric effect. It showed that light wasn't just a wave. It could act like a particle too. This was the beginning of quantum theory, a strange and radical field that would later unsettle even himself. His ideas helped others eventually develop technologies like solar panels, lasers, and even the foundations of modern computing. The second paper confirmed the existence of atoms. At the time, atoms were still considered theoretical. Many scientists weren't even convinced they were real. But Einstein, through statistical calculations, showed how their motion could explain the behavior of particles suspended in liquid. Suddenly, the invisible world of atoms had a doorway, and Albert had opened it. The third paper was about special relativity. In it, Einstein proposed something astonishing, that space and time are not fixed. They bend, they stretch, they change depending on how fast you're moving. Imagine two people, one standing still and one speeding through space. Their clocks would tick at different rates. The faster you move, the slower time becomes. Reality, it seemed, was more fluid than anyone had dared to think. And then came the fourth paper, just a few pages long, a quiet bombshell. In it, he introduced a simple formula, E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. That one equation showed that matter and energy were interchangeable. A single drop of mass held unimaginable energy, a principle that would later power stars, fuel nuclear energy, and awaken terrifying possibilities. And all of this from a man with no university position, no laboratory, and no assistant. Just a pen, a desk, and a relentless imagination. The scientific world barely knew what had hit it. But in that modest little office, a revolution had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. In 1919, the world changed for Albert Einstein, not because of a new discovery, but because the world finally saw what he had already revealed. That year, British astronomer Sir Arthur Eddington led an expedition to observe a solar eclipse. During the eclipse, stars that passed near the sun appeared to shift their positions ever so slightly, the bending of light around a massive object, just as Einstein's theory of general relativity had predicted. The newspapers seized it with both hands. One headline shouted, "Lights all askew in the heavens." Overnight, Einstein went from an obscure patent clerk turned physicist to a household name. Not just in Germany, not just in scientific circles, everywhere. He became the first global celebrity of science. Reporters followed him. Crowds gathered at his lectures. His face appeared in magazines and newspapers, often paired with the mysterious formula E equals mc squared, even if most people didn't quite understand what it meant. But fame was never what Einstein wanted. He found it odd, exhausting even. Strangers stopped him in the street. Letters poured in by the hundreds, questions, compliments, theories, and pleas. He was amused by it, but also overwhelmed. He once said that being a celebrity made him feel like an exotic animal in a zoo. Beneath the public spotlight, Einstein remained who he had always been. An introvert, a thinker, a wanderer of ideas. While people gathered to hear him speak, he preferred walking alone or playing his violin in a quiet room. He loved to sail, even though he wasn't very good at it. The water, like the universe, gave him space to drift. In private, he continued to work tirelessly. He was still chasing the deepest truths of reality, still asking questions no one else dared to ask. But now there were distractions, ceremonies, honors, and obligations. The world wanted more from him than just science. They wanted a voice, a leader, a symbol. Einstein obliged, to a point. But deep down he missed the obscurity of Bern, the stillness of the patent office, the purity of thought untouched by fame. In many ways, the loner who had imagined riding on a beam of light now lived under a spotlight too bright for comfort. And yet, through it all, his mind never stopped asking why. As the world marched toward chaos in the early 20th century, Albert Einstein stood apart, not just as a scientist, but as a voice of conscience. The horrors of World War I deeply disturbed him. The glorification of violence, the blind loyalty to flags, the endless rows of young men sent to die. It was all senseless to him. He was not just against war, he was broken by it. While many German intellectuals signed declarations supporting the war, Einstein refused. He co-authored a counter-manifesto, though it went largely ignored. It didn't matter. He believed that silence in the face of violence was a form of betrayal. And from then on, he spoke more openly about the need for peace, understanding, and global cooperation. After the war, Einstein's beliefs began to evolve even further. He became increasingly engaged with political issues, not because he sought power, but because he couldn't bear to watch humanity destroy itself. He saw nationalism as a poison. Racism, inequality, and militarism disturbed him deeply. He began to speak out for pacifism, Zionism, and civil rights, ideas that made him both admired and hated. And then came the rise of Adolf Hitler. As anti-Semitism spread like wildfire through Germany, Einstein knew he had to leave. His home, his country, his reputation, none of it was safe. In 1933, he renounced his German citizenship and accepted a position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. There, in quiet exile, he would spend the rest of his life. But peace didn't follow him. Across the ocean, the Nazi regime was growing bolder, and the threat of a terrible weapon, a bomb powered by the very equation Einstein had uncovered, loomed on the horizon. In 1939, Einstein signed a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. In it, he warned that Germany might be developing a nuclear weapon. He urged the U.S. to begin its own research. That letter helped initiate the Manhattan Project, the race to build the atomic bomb. Though Einstein did not work on the bomb itself, he carried the guilt of that letter for the rest of his life. His warning had come from fear, not ambition. And when he saw what that fear had unleashed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, his heart grew heavy. He had unlocked energy from matter, but he could not control how the world used it. By the time Albert Einstein settled into his new life in Princeton, New Jersey, he was no longer just a scientist. He had become a symbol. To many, he represented the very spirit of free thought, of reason in the face of chaos. And yet in exile, Einstein sought something much simpler: quiet. He moved into a modest home on a tree-lined street where he would live for the rest of his life. The neighbors often saw him walking alone, hands behind his back, his hair wild in the wind. He didn't own socks. He disliked fame, and he welcomed visitors only when the visits were sincere. In Princeton, he found space not only to think, but to breathe. At the Institute for Advanced Study, Einstein continued to work on what he called the unified field theory. His goal was almost spiritual in nature, to find a single, elegant equation that could explain all the fundamental forces of nature: gravity, electromagnetism, and beyond. He believed the universe was not random, but ordered. There had to be a pattern, a symmetry, a deeper code beneath the surface. But the answer always danced just out of reach. While quantum physicists were busy embracing uncertainty and probability, Einstein resisted. God does not play dice with the universe. He famously said he didn't mean religion in a traditional sense. For him, God was more like the harmony of natural laws, the perfect logic of the cosmos. He could not accept that the universe was ruled by randomness. He wanted a universe that made sense. Outside of physics, he continued to speak up. He became an outspoken critic of racism in America, comparing it to the anti-Semitism he had fled in Europe. He supported civil rights leaders, condemned nuclear weapons, and refused to stay silent on matters of injustice. And yet, most of his days were spent in solitude, reading, scribbling equations, writing letters, listening to music, watching the seasons change from his study window. Some believed he had grown out of touch with modern science, but Einstein didn't mind. He was no longer chasing prestige or headlines. He was chasing beauty, truth, something deeper. In the quiet corridors of exile, he wasn't lost. He was still looking for the next mystery worth unraveling. Albert Einstein's final years were spent much like the rest of his life, in thought. He continued to rise early, take long walks, and fill page after page with calculations. His handwriting, still steady, curved across yellowed paper as he tried again and again to find the elusive theory that would unite the forces of nature. It didn't matter that younger physicists were moving in new directions. Einstein had made peace with walking alone. He often rejected fame, turning down honors, speaking invitations, even political power. In 1952, after the death of Israel's first president, Einstein was offered the presidency of the country. He respectfully declined, calling himself unfit for such responsibilities. "I deal with equations, not people," he said. He preferred quiet over power, clarity over control. At home in Princeton, he was known to the locals not as a genius, but as the gentle, strange old man who wandered the neighborhood, usually without socks, sometimes humming to himself. Children liked him. He would smile, offer them sweets, or ruffle their hair, and in return, they gave him the thing he valued most: freedom from questions. In private, Einstein's health began to fade. His heart was growing weak, but he refused surgery. He believed that life had a natural rhythm, and he would not interrupt it. "It is tasteless to prolong life artificially," he once said. "I have done my share. It is time to go." On April 17, 1955, Albert Einstein collapsed from internal bleeding caused by an aortic aneurysm. He was taken to the hospital where doctors offered treatment. He quietly refused. The next morning, April 18th, he passed away in his sleep. He left behind no grand farewell, no staged goodbye, just a stack of notes on his desk. Scribbled equations from the night before. He had been working on his unified theory until the end, as if the universe might offer him one last glimpse of its secrets. His body was cremated in a private ceremony and his ashes scattered in an undisclosed location. He had asked that no shrine be built, no grave to become a monument. He had always belonged to the cosmos, and in the end, he returned to it. The man who revealed the fabric of space and time slipped quietly back into it. Albert Einstein is gone, but his presence never really left. His ideas still ripple through time, quiet and profound, like echoes in a vast cosmic canyon. His name has become more than a name. It is a symbol whispered in classrooms, scribbled into textbooks, turned into jokes, questions, compliments, and even cartoons. But beneath the pop culture shadow lies something more meaningful, a man who never stopped asking why. He changed how we see the world, not just scientifically, but philosophically. Before Einstein, time was a steady drumbeat, space a static stage. After him, they became flexible, fluid, woven together into a fabric that could bend, twist, and ripple. He helped us understand that mass and energy were not different things, but different faces of the same truth. That reality could look different depending on how fast you moved or how closely you looked. But beyond the theories and formulas, Einstein taught us something quieter, something deeper. That it's okay not to have all the answers. That imagination has value. That the universe is not just made of particles and math, but also of wonder. The most beautiful experience, he once wrote, is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, wrestled with regrets, struggled in relationships, but in many ways that made him more human, not less. He was not a cold genius in an ivory tower. He laughed, he loved, he doubted, he cared. He spoke for peace when others remained silent. He stood against injustice even when it cost him. And he never let the weight of fame silence his curiosity. Today, we continue to build on what he began. Satellites navigate using his equations. Nuclear energy pulses with his discoveries. Black holes curve space as he predicted. And far above us, in the silence of deep space, the light from distant galaxies still bends just as he said it would. As you lay there tonight, listening to the quiet hum around you, know this: the universe is still expanding, still unfolding, still filled with questions. And somewhere in the whisper of stars and the curve of time, the spirit of Einstein lingers, smiling, always curious, always wondering what comes next. Sleep well and keep asking why. Alas, it is dawn on August 24th, 79 AD. The sun rises slowly over Pompeii, washing the city in soft golden light. Shadows stretch across cobbled streets as shopkeepers unlatch their shutters and sweep yesterday's dust into the gutters. The distant sound of metal striking stone echoes through the forum. Blacksmiths already at work. Inside a bakery near the Temple of Apollo, the fire in the oven is stoked, and fresh loaves are arranged for sale. The smell of warm bread mixes with crushed olives, garlic, and the sharp bite of fermenting wine. In the stables, donkeys shuffle and bray, eager for water. In one of the wealthier villas, a mosaicist arranges colored tiles on a half-finished floor, humming softly to himself. Pompeii is alive. Children splash each other at a public fountain. A fruit seller slices figs for a customer. 2 Roman soldiers off duty lounge near a tavern door, drinking watered-down wine and laughing at the heat already rising from the stone. Overhead, laundry sways gently between buildings on long cords, dancing lazily in the morning breeze. But not everything is as it seems. Above them all, Mount Vesuvius stands tall, quiet, looming, ancient. This morning, thin white wisps rise faintly from its peak. They disappear quickly into the sky. To most, it's nothing. A curious cloud, a morning haze. Earthquakes had rattled the region days before, but nothing unusual. This land is known to move. The people of Pompeii live with the mountain. They trust it. They do not fear it. In a shaded garden, a young woman picks herbs, basil, mint, thyme. Her sandals crunch on gravel as she moves from bed to bed. She doesn't notice the silence above her. Birds have fled. The bees are gone. The air feels heavier as if the sky is holding its breath. A slave in a nearby household glances up at the mountain, frowning. He senses something, but before he can dwell on it, he's called back inside. Water to fetch, floors to scrub, life to live. And so Pompeii continues. The morning flows forward as if the earth itself has not already begun to shift, as if time itself hasn't already decided to stop. By nightfall, the morning grows warmer. By 8:30 a.m., the sun is high over Pompeii, and the streets hum with movement. Shoppers haggle over dates and lentils in the bustling Macellum. The scent of fish and vinegar drifts through the air. Slaves haul buckets of water from public fountains. Children chase each other around columns. Everything feels ordinary. And yet, not quite. Something in the air has shifted. The ground gives a soft tremor beneath the feet. Not enough to knock anything over, just enough to pause conversation. A moment of uncertainty. Then, like a breeze, the moment passes and people go on. Earthquakes are common here. The mountain has always stirred. Still, the signs grow louder if one knows how to listen. At the temple of Isis, the priestess stops mid-prayer. A jug on the altar rattles gently, almost imperceptibly. She narrows her eyes at the smoke rising from the incense. It swirls strangely, caught in a breeze that isn't there. She says nothing, but she feels something ancient shifting. In a courtyard garden near the city's edge, a dog whines and claws at the door. It's tied up as always, but today it pulls harder. The woman of the house frowns at the ash on her steps. Ash. It must be from a neighbor's fire, she thinks. She brushes it away and continues with her day. By 10 a.m., the tremors become more frequent. Small rolling quakes every half hour. A crack forms in the side of a wall near the amphitheater. No one sees it happen. A merchant blames the crack on age and time. But the time is now, and age is no longer the culprit. Up on Vesuvius, white vapor thickens into a dark gray column. It stretches upward, slow but constant. Faint rumbles echo down the slope. The goats have scattered. The air smells faintly of sulfur. By noon, ash begins to fall. Light at first, like snowflakes, but warm to the touch. They land on rooftops, float into open jars, dust the shoulders of market-goers. Some stop and look up. They squint at the sun, which now glows through a thin veil of gray. The mountain is speaking, but Pompeii still isn't listening. It begins without warning. At exactly 12:02 p.m., the summit of Mount Vesuvius explodes. A thunderclap tears through the sky so loud it shatters windows in Pompeii and is heard as far away as Misenum across the bay. The mountain doesn't just tremble, it opens. A plume of ash, pumice, and rock shoots violently into the air, reaching nearly 20 kilometers high in a matter of minutes. The force turns daylight into dusk. From Pompeii's streets, it looks like the sky itself is breaking apart. At the Forum, people scream and scatter. Birds, what few remain, vanish into the blackening sky. Above them, the sun dims, casting an eerie bronze glow across the city. The column of ash climbs higher and higher, forming what Pliny the Younger would later call a pine tree of smoke. Thick at the base, branching at the top, small rocks begin to rain down. Pumice, porous, sharp, and hot. They bounce off tiled roofs and sting exposed skin. At first, the hail is light, but it gains weight. It gains speed. Soon, the streets are covered in gray. Inside homes, people look to the gods. Some gather their families and rush toward the city gates. Others retreat deeper inside, believing the walls will protect them. One woman clutches her jewelry and rushes to the basement. A baker, covered in flour, grabs a sack of coins and locks the door behind him. But there is no safety. The ash begins to choke the air. People wrap cloth around their mouths. Their eyes sting. Their lungs tighten. The city's once bright marble becomes coated in soot. Statues of gods disappear under a falling sky. At the harbor, the sea pulls back unnaturally, then crashes back in violent waves. Ships rock and break from their moorings. Some attempt to flee by boat, but the winds whip wildly. Visibility fades, water turns black. In the hills, a farmer watches in silence as the mountain roars and the heavens rain stone. Time begins to fracture. Minutes feel like hours. The rhythm of life, once measured by the clang of market stalls and temple bells, is replaced by coughing, screaming, and silence. Pompeii does not know it yet, but the countdown has begun. By 1 p.m., the city of Pompeii is unrecognizable. Ash falls like rain, thick and suffocating. The ground is hidden beneath a rising blanket of gray. Roofs begin to sag under the growing weight of pumice. The streets are no longer roads, they are rivers of dust and stone. Panic sets in. Citizens rush to the city gates, the Porta Marina, the Porta Nola. Each one becomes a choke point as carts, animals, and people collide in frantic waves. Horses rear and buck. Children scream for parents, slaves run alongside masters, class forgotten in the shadow of the mountain. Inside homes, the light has disappeared. Even at midday, the interior rooms are lit only by oil lamps flickering dimly through curtains of dust. Some families choose to hide. They shut windows, brace doors and pray that the storm will pass. Others decide to flee, grabbing whatever valuables they can carry. Coins, amulets, silverware, household gods. The air grows thicker by the minute. People press cloth to their mouths, but the ash finds its way in. Breathing becomes a struggle. For the elderly and the very young, it is almost impossible. Some collapse in the streets, coughing, unable to go on. A man helps his pregnant wife down an alley, one arm shielding her head, the other carrying a small bronze statue of Minerva. Nearby, a group of teenagers tries to climb onto the city walls, hoping for a better view or perhaps a way out. They stop laughing when a nearby roof caves in with a deep, heavy crash. At the baths, steam mixes with volcanic dust. The air is thick and unbreathable. Water becomes cloudy with ash. Those inside stumble out, wrapped in towels, unsure whether to run or return. Farther out in the fields, some who fled early look back toward Pompeii and weep. The city is cloaked in black. The massive column of smoke towers above it like a curse. Lightning cracks within the ash cloud, painting the sky in flashes of orange and blue. It is no longer a disaster. It is a burial in progress, and Vesuvius has only begun to exhale. By mid-afternoon, Pompeii is disappearing. Stone by stone, breath by breath, the ashfall no longer drifts gently. It crashes down in waves, driven by shifting winds and the mountain's furious breath. By now, over a meter of pumice covers the streets. Doors cannot open. Windows cannot close. The weight of the sky has settled on the city, and it shows no sign of lifting. The roofs begin to fail. The first collapse comes at a villa near the House of the Thorn. The roof gives way with a low, aching groan, then crashes inward with terrifying speed. Dust bursts outward. The home's frescoes vanish beneath rubble. Statues fall. A slave girl trapped in the atrium has no time to scream. It is not the last. All across Pompeii, walls shudder and beams snap. In a workshop, a merchant tries to shield his goods with a sheet of cloth before the upper floor caves in. In a bakery, an oven still glows faintly, but the ceiling above it sags dangerously. No one is left to feed the fire. The city grows darker. Ash clogs the oil lamps, dims their flames. The air turns gritty and bitter. It coats mouths, nostrils, and lungs. Breathing is shallow, wheezing. People now move not to escape, but to find air. Just a pocket, just a breath. The silence is broken only by the crashing of buildings, the coughing of the trapped, and the rumble of Vesuvius far above. The world has shrunk to shadows and ash. Some residents retreat underground into storerooms and wine cellars. There they huddle in pitch darkness, hoping the stone above them will hold. Mothers wrap their arms around their children. Some clutch keys, hoping to return to homes that are already gone. Others hold nothing at all, just the hands of those they love. Outside, time slows. The ash is now knee-deep. Streets are silent. The fountains have stopped flowing. The statues of the gods are buried up to their shoulders, their marble faces streaked with soot. Pompeii is still alive, but barely. Its heart beats slower now. And above it all, Mount Vesuvius continues to rumble, preparing something even worse than ash. The ash has fallen for hours now. Pompeii is half buried, suffocating, silent. Then the mountain changes. At 5:30 p.m., Mount Vesuvius gives a low, guttural roar, different from before. It is not an explosion, it is a release. Something deep inside has cracked. A moment later, the first pyroclastic surge breaks loose. It is not lava, it is worse. A dense cloud of superheated gas, ash, and pulverized rock rushes down the slope. Over 700 degrees Celsius, faster than wind. A gray avalanche that flows like water and burns like fire. It hits the neighboring town of Herculaneum first, swallowing it whole in under 5 minutes. People are flash-heated to death where they stand. Bodies do not fall. They are frozen upright, carbonized in an instant. Skulls fracture from the steam expanding within. The surge is so fast no one has time to run. Pompeii is still, but it can feel the change. The air already thick with ash grows hotter. Sulfur hangs heavy in every breath. A second tremor shakes the city. Columns tilt. A bronze statue topples with a metallic crash. Those still alive can now see the glowing red rim around the mountain. They hear the sound of boiling earth like thunder rolling from beneath their feet. A few try to run again, but it's too late. Roads are gone. Homes are sealed. Escape is impossible. A boy clutches his father's tunic. They stand in a stairwell beneath a collapsed roof. He asks if the gods are angry. The man does not answer. He doesn't know. By 6:30 p.m., thick black clouds blot out even the faintest hint of daylight. Ash now reaches the shoulders of statues, the tops of market stalls. Fires burn in several buildings, their flames dimmed by smoke. And then silence, brief, complete, terrifying. The first pyroclastic surge has not yet reached Pompeii, but it is close. The mountain has changed the rules. What began as ash and fear is now something else, something final. Above the rooftops, the sky glows red and pulses with lightning. The mountain is no longer a distant danger. It is a living god, and it is coming. Pompeii has hours left, maybe, but the mercy of time is fading. Darkness has swallowed Pompeii completely. There is no moon, no stars, no flame that can pierce the weight of ash in the air. Only the soft red flicker from distant fires reflects off the ash-covered walls. The city no longer breathes. It waits. Between 7 and 10 p.m., the silence becomes unbearable. Those still alive speak in whispers. Voices are from the dust. Eyes burn. Chests ache. Most have stopped trying to flee. There is nowhere to go. The gates are blocked. The sea is choked with debris. The streets are impossible, filled with hot, shifting ash that rises to the waist. In a once elegant villa near the Street of Abundance, a young woman lights a single oil lamp. She kneels beside her father, who can no longer stand. He presses a pendant into her hand, his final gift. In the garden beside them, statues of Venus and Apollo lean sideways, half buried. Elsewhere, a mother huddles beneath the stairs with her son. She hums a lullaby, trying to calm him, though her voice shakes. The boy is quiet, not because he isn't afraid, but because he is. Fear has become normal. Breathing is the only thing left to do, and even that is fading. In the stables, a dog lies twisted in its chain, claw marks deep in the ground. It had tried to free itself, but the ash came too quickly. By 8:45 p.m., tremors return, heavier, deeper. The ground groans under the weight of pressure building within the volcano. Walls buckle. Another roof caves in near the temple. Dust sprays upward. A pillar collapses into a courtyard, shattering with a final echo. People now crouch in silence. There are no more plans, no more directions, only moments. One breath, another. Pompeii's final witnesses are still. Some kneel in prayer, others lie flat, arms shielding their faces. A few hold hands, lips moving softly in darkness. No more screams, just breath and stone. At 9:50 p.m., the glow above the mountain changes. Brighter, redder. The second pyroclastic surge begins to form. Faster, heavier, deadlier. The final moments are here, and Pompeii, bruised and blind, does not cry out. It simply braces for whatever comes next. At 10:15 p.m., the mountain breaks. The second pyroclastic surge explodes from the flanks of Vesuvius with no warning. It is not a wave, it is a wall. A roaring mass of gas, ash, molten rock, and invisible death surges down the slopes at over 100 miles per hour. It does not burn. It vaporizes, it does not knock, it crushes. This time it reaches Pompeii. In one terrifying moment, the entire city is engulfed. The surge races through gates, alleys, gardens, and temples, smashing everything in its path. The temperature reaches beyond 400 degrees Celsius. Wood ignites instantly. Bodies are flash burned. No time to run, no time to think. Only stillness. People are frozen where they fell. A man reaching for his wife, a mother shielding her child, a priest with his hands still raised in prayer. The heat robs breath before the lungs can exhale. Muscles lock. Ash hardens around forms, leaving voids in the shape of final gestures. Structures collapse all at once. Ceilings fall. Walls crumble. The forum is buried beneath debris. Even marble statues begin to crack and blister from the heat. Fountains dry mid-flow, ash filling their basins like a last offering. The surge takes less than a minute to erase the city. Then, silence. A silence that does not feel like peace. It is too deep, too absolute. It is the sound of finality, of something vast and ancient completing its terrible task. The mountain groans once more, then settles. Pompeii is gone. No smoke rises from chimneys. No voices echo in the streets. No feet walk across the forum stones. The ash lies thick and still, a city perfectly preserved beneath 10 feet of volcanic dust, caught not in ruin, but in pause. The winds shift gently over the plain, carrying the last of the sulfur east. The stars return to the sky, but there is no one to see them. All that remains is shape, position, posture, the frozen choreography of people who had no time to say goodbye. And above them, Mount Vesuvius looms, quiet now, emptied of fury, crowned in steam. But deep beneath that stillness, Pompeii sleeps, waiting. Midnight passes. The eruption slows. What was once a roar has become a murmur, distant, almost tired. Vesuvius exhales smoke into the black sky, but its fire has gone. Pompeii lies beneath it now, utterly still. There are no more screams, no more footsteps, no prayers, no winds to carry them. Only ash, heavy and unmoving. Beneath this blanket, the city sleeps. Temples remain standing, half covered, their gods silenced by stone. Amphorae lie untouched in kitchens. Loaves of bread sit fossilized in ovens. Tables are still set. Coins rest in drawers beside forgotten dreams. Time has stopped, but everything has remained exactly where it was, frozen in its last heartbeat. No one comes to search. Not for days, not for years. Eventually, not for centuries. Nature reclaims the region slowly. Vines creep over broken columns. The earth cools. New trees root in the ash. Grass grows where Pompeian voices once echoed. The name Pompeii fades from maps, from memory, from history. Other cities rise. Empires fall. The mountain sleeps again. And then, 1,700 years later, the silence breaks. In 1748, during routine excavation, workmen strike something unexpected. Painted walls, bright, delicate, preserved. They dig deeper. Rooms appear. Skeletons, mosaics, streets. Pompeii begins to awaken. Historians, artists, and archaeologists come to the buried city like pilgrims. They brush ash from frescoes. They cast the empty voids left by human bodies, filling them with plaster, revealing forms caught in the moment of death. A man curled on a stair, a girl clutching her necklace, a dog straining against its chain. We do not see ruins, we see life interrupted. Pompeii becomes more than a tragedy. It becomes a mirror, a time capsule, a reminder that joy, fear, beauty, and loss all coexist in a single breath. That a city can disappear in one night and still whisper across 2 millennia. Today, we walk the same streets. We stand in doorways where others once lived and loved. We stare into plaster faces shaped by fire and silence. And we imagine their voices. They are gone, but they are not forgotten. Because sometimes the past is not lost. It is simply waiting. And in the quiet gray of volcanic ash, Pompeii still remembers. Neo. At the turn of the 20th century, a quiet exodus began. From Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, Black families packed what little they had and moved. Some boarded northbound trains. Others rode in the backs of wagons with children asleep on bundles of clothes. They were escaping Jim Crow laws, lynchings, debt slavery, and fear. They were chasing something distant and fragile, freedom. Between 1910 and 1930, over 1.2 million Black Americans left the rural South. Historians would call it the Great Migration, but for those who lived it, it was simply a chance to breathe. Cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia welcomed these new arrivals. But it was Harlem in Upper Manhattan that would become the brightest flame of all. Originally developed for white middle-class families, Harlem's housing boom collapsed in the early 1900s. Landlords, desperate to fill apartments, turned to the Black community. What followed was a transformation. Harlem became more than a neighborhood. It became a sanctuary. Within just a few blocks, you could find doctors, tailors, shoemakers, artists, and jazz musicians. You could hear sermons and saxophones, see poetry and protest, all in the same breath. It was not an easy life. Racism did not disappear in New York. Jobs were scarce, pay was low, but something else filled the streets. Hope. For the first time, Black people were living not in survival, but in expression. They were among their own, in a place that felt like something they had never known before. Home. Harlem became a laboratory of Black life, a place where culture wasn't just preserved, it was remixed. Traditions brought from the South mingled with Caribbean rhythms, African spiritual roots, and European modernism. Voices once silenced began to sing. Ideas once ignored began to spark. And before long, Harlem wasn't just a place to live, it was a place to be seen. By the early 1920s, you could feel it. Something was blooming, not a revolution in politics, but in art, in music, in language, in pride, a renaissance, not just of talent, but of identity, not just of performance, but of power. It had taken centuries of struggle to reach this moment. But in Harlem, at last, Black America began to tell its own story out loud. In Harlem, sound became the city's pulse. And nothing moved through its veins more powerfully than jazz. It didn't come from ivory towers or written scores. It came from front porches in New Orleans, from battered trumpets and syncopated hearts. It traveled north with the Great Migration, carried in memory and muscle where it met Harlem's hunger for expression and exploded. By the early 1920s, jazz wasn't just music. It was freedom set to rhythm. It bent rules. It played with time. It turned pain into melody and silence into motion. In Harlem, it echoed from open windows and spilled from basement clubs into the midnight air. On any given night, you might hear the gravel-rich voice of Bessie Smith rising from a record player in a parlor. You might pass a corner where a boy with a cornet tried to imitate Louis Armstrong. And if you were lucky enough or wealthy enough, you might step into a velvet-lined booth at the Cotton Club and hear Duke Ellington's orchestra thunder to life. Ellington's arrangements were a universe of sound. Horns that spoke like people, drums that made the floor shake, pianos that floated and pounced. His music didn't follow, it led. It made people move in ways they'd never moved before. For the first time in American history, Black musicians weren't just playing music, they were defining it. Outside the spotlight, the Harlem streets pulsed with rhythm, too. People danced in the Savoy Ballroom, a place where Black and white New Yorkers danced side by side, a radical act in its own right. Swing, stride, blues, it all blurred into one heartbeat. But jazz wasn't just noise, it was language. A trumpet solo could shout or weep, a saxophone could seduce or mourn. It captured what words often couldn't, the complexity of Black life, the joy and the ache, the rage and the pride. Even as racism and poverty pressed in, the music lifted people out. It said, "We are still here. We are still beautiful. We are still loud." And Harlem listened, not with ears only, but with its soul. While jazz poured from clubs and street corners, another revolution was happening in silence, on the page. In Harlem, words began to gather power. Young writers, poets, and thinkers took to their pens with the same energy musicians took to their instruments. But they weren't writing for applause, they were writing for truth, for memory, for justice, for voice. Langston Hughes arrived in Harlem like a rising tide. He was just a teenager when he wrote The Negro Speaks of Rivers, a poem that stretched across time, tracing Black identity from the Nile to the Mississippi. His poetry was simple, musical, and unafraid. He wrote of everyday people, janitors, dancers, tired mothers, dreamers, and gave their voices shape. Claude McKay's words were sharper, defiant, burning with a righteous fire. In poems like If We Must Die, he spoke directly to injustice with clenched fists and open eyes. For him, the pen was not just a tool, it was a blade. And then there was Zora Neale Hurston, a daughter of Eatonville, Florida, the first all-black town incorporated in the United States. Zora studied anthropology and captured the spoken word like no one else. She wrote the way people talked. Her stories were alive with dialect, rhythm, myth, and heat. Where others sought polish, she sought truth. Her voice was raw, real, and utterly new. Harlem's parlors became literary salons. Writers gathered late into the night, reading drafts aloud, arguing over politics and poetry. Black-owned magazines like The Crisis and Opportunity published bold new voices, voices that had once been ignored or erased. Together, they were forming something radical, a literature of Black identity, unfiltered by white approval, unapologetic in tone. They weren't trying to fit in, they were trying to speak. And in every stanza, story, and essay, they answered a quiet question. What does it mean to be Black in America? Sometimes the answer came as a love letter, sometimes as a shout, sometimes as a lullaby filled with longing. But always the pen pressed forward. Because in Harlem during this Renaissance, to write was to resist, and to resist was to live with pride. The Renaissance wasn't only heard or read, it was seen. In Harlem, artists took to the canvas with purpose and power. They painted what hadn't been painted before. Black life, Black beauty, Black history through Black eyes, not as subjects of study or caricature, but as creators of culture, as storytellers of their own. Aaron Douglas led the way. A quiet man with bold vision. Douglas blended African motifs with modernist style, geometric forms, layered silhouettes, radiant lines that pulsed with energy. His murals didn't just hang on walls, they told epics. From the sorrow of slavery to the pride of resistance, his art mapped the journey of a people rising. In aspects of Negro life, he captured it all. Dancers in motion, men in chains, a hand reaching upward toward light. His figures were faceless but not nameless. They were everyone. They were ancestors. They were hope. Palmer Hayden painted the working class, barbers, fishermen, everyday people in ordinary moments. Archibald Motley brought Black nightlife to vibrant life with crowded scenes of jazz clubs, laughter, and light bouncing off polished shoes and smiling faces. Meanwhile, in dark rooms across Harlem, photographers like James Van Der Zee captured a different kind of beauty, real beauty. His portraits showed Black families dressed in their finest, newlyweds holding hands, soldiers in uniform, children standing proudly beside their parents. Van Der Zee gave Harlem its mirror, one that reflected dignity, joy, pride, and sorrow. He saw the sacred in the everyday and framed it with reverence. Visual art during the Harlem Renaissance was never just about aesthetics. It was declaration. It was correction. It was truth. Artists reclaimed their image from centuries of distortion. No longer mammies and minstrels. No longer anonymous laborers or faceless shadows. Now they were kings, queens, mothers, scholars, lovers, dancers, rebels, and saints. Every brushstroke was a protest against invisibility. Every photograph was a sentence in a story never allowed to be told. Art was no longer trapped in galleries or elite hands. It was sewn into Harlem's fabric on church walls, in shop windows, in community centers, in the pages of magazines. The canvas was wide, and Harlem's artists filled it, not with fantasy, but with truth made visible. While jazz filled the air and poetry lit up the page, something deeper moved beneath Harlem's Renaissance, an awakening of political purpose. For centuries, Black people had been told to shrink themselves, to be invisible, to survive quietly. But in Harlem, pride was becoming a public stance. And with that pride came politics, not in the form of party lines, but in the form of identity, power, and refusal. W.E.B. Du Bois, the scholar and activist, had long believed in the uplift of the talented 10th, the most educated and accomplished Black individuals who could lead the way forward. He saw the Harlem Renaissance as proof that the race had greatness to offer, not someday, but now. He urged artists to use their gifts not just for beauty, but for justice. He believed that art should serve a purpose, elevate the race, challenge white supremacy, and shine light on truths too long ignored. But not everyone agreed. Younger artists like Langston Hughes pushed back against the idea that black art had to behave. Hughes wanted freedom to write about the poor, the struggling, the joyful, the angry. "We know we are beautiful," he wrote, "and ugly too." For him, the politics of pride was about showing all of it, the full, messy, glorious humanity of black life. Then came Marcus Garvey. Where Du Bois focused on integration and uplift, Garvey dreamed of independence. Through his movement, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, he preached self-reliance, economic strength, and a return to African roots. Garvey's message resonated. His parades filled the streets. His red, black, and green flag became a symbol of global black identity. He spoke of ships, of black-owned industry, of shaking free from systems that would never accept them. Together, these voices, Du Bois, Hughes, Garvey, and countless others, didn't always agree, but they created a chorus. And in Harlem, that chorus was loud, brilliant, and unignorable. Because the Harlem Renaissance wasn't just a cultural movement, it was a political one, a movement that didn't ask for a seat at the table. It built its own, and beneath every note, every brushstroke, every word written by candlelight was a steady rising drumbeat. We exist. We matter. We are. In the spotlight of Harlem's stage, a new kind of woman stood tall, brilliant, bold, and unafraid. She was more than a muse or a background character. She was a scholar, a singer, a sculptor, a storyteller. She didn't ask to be included. She declared her presence. And in doing so, she helped shape the Renaissance itself. Zora Neale Hurston was one of its brightest flames, a folklorist, novelist, and unapologetic voice of the rural South. Zora brought black dialect, myth, and rhythm into literature with fearless clarity. Where others reached for polish, she reached for truth. Her characters spoke like the people she grew up with. They sang, they laughed, they fought, and they lived. In their eyes were watching God, she gave readers a heroine who found her voice not through love, but through loss, through land, through herself. Zora studied anthropology at Barnard College, the only black student there. She traveled the South recording songs, traditions, and stories that had never been written down. She treated black culture not as a curiosity, but as a legacy, one to be honored, one to be preserved. She wasn't alone. In Paris, Josephine Baker electrified European audiences. Barefoot and fierce, she danced with joy and rebellion. Her performances were playful and political, mocking the very stereotypes others tried to impose. Offstage, she became a spy during World War II, smuggling secrets for the French resistance. Back in the States, women like Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith gave voice to pain, pleasure, and power through the blues. Their lyrics were raw. Their presence was undeniable. They sang not for approval, but for release, for themselves and every woman who had loved hard and lived harder. Women of the Harlem Renaissance also organized. They led clubs, published essays, hosted salons. They fought for women's rights while confronting racism within the broader feminist movement. They carved their own path through art and activism alike. These women were not accessories to the Renaissance. They were architects of it. They redefined what it meant to be black and female, unbound, unfiltered, and unashamed. And in every word, every note, every painted line, they left a message echoing through time. I will not be silenced. I am the story, too. When the sun dipped below the Manhattan skyline and the street lamps flickered on, Harlem transformed. By day, it was a city of workers and thinkers, families and artists. But by night, Harlem came alive in a different way. A rhythm that pulsed beneath the surface in smoke-filled clubs, crowded ballrooms, and late-night whispers. The music didn't stop when darkness fell. It got louder, bolder, sweatier. The Cotton Club was one of the most famous venues, lavish, glittering, and segregated. White patrons sat in tuxedos and pearls, sipping gin, while black performers gave them the night of their lives. Duke Ellington ruled the stage, his fingers commanding every key, Dancers flew across the floor like lightning. Voices rose over brass and beat. The irony was sharp. Black bodies on the stage, banned from the seats. But the performers owned the room in their own way. They dazzled. They dominated. They created something so magnetic that even racism couldn't look away. Elsewhere, the Savoy Ballroom told a different story. It was the people's place. No velvet rope, no segregation. Here, black and white dancers mingled freely. Lindy hoppers spun in wide circles, skirts twirling, shoes sliding. The floor was alive with joy. The music was louder here, raw, closer to the ground. Beyond the dance halls, Harlem's nightlife included back alley speakeasies, upstairs jazz dens, and apartment gatherings where strangers became friends over records and wine. These weren't just parties, they were performances, rituals of release. In a world that tried to keep black people quiet, Harlem at night was a place to laugh loudly, move freely, and claim space. Writers came too, Langston Hughes scribbling poems on napkins, musicians trading verses between sets, painters sketched by candlelight, philosophers debated over bourbon and smoke. Every evening held the promise of art being born in real time. But Harlem's nights weren't just glitter and music. They also revealed tensions between fame and exploitation, celebration and survival. There were performers paid pennies for brilliance, dancers who worked until dawn, then woke at noon to clean hotel rooms. Behind the glamour was grit. Still, something electric lived in those hours. Something that said, we are alive, we are brilliant, we will shine. Especially when the world goes dark. And shine they did. In Harlem, even getting dressed was an act of defiance. Every collar, every hat tilt, every flash of color was more than fashion. It was a statement. Style wasn't just about beauty. It was about power, about being seen in a world that tried to make black people invisible. Men wore zoot suits, broad shoulders, high waists, long jackets that flowed when they walked. It wasn't subtle, that was the point. These were clothes that took up space. That said, I belong here. Shoes were polished to mirrors, hats angled just right. Even the strut down Lenox Avenue carried intention, a rhythm all its own. Women embraced elegance and boldness. Bright lipsticks, silk blouses, tailored dresses with intricate beadwork. Hair was sculpted, straightened, curled. Some wore head wraps, others let their natural curls shine. Style was a personal canvas where tradition met modernity. And whether they worked in clubs or cleaned houses by day, Harlem women walked the streets with heads high and hips swinging. But it went deeper than clothing. Language became art. Slang, dialect, code switching, all were tools of resistance. Young people invented new ways of speaking, twisting words with wit, rhythm, and soul. They didn't just adapt English, they reimagined it. Whether in the cadence of a poem or the snap of conversation, every syllable was layered with history and pride. Even silence had its power. A raised eyebrow, a paused breath, a hand placed firmly on a hip. These too were part of the performance. Nonverbal declarations that said, you may overlook me, but I see myself clearly. In beauty salons and barbershops, community temples in their own right, style was passed down, shared, sharpened. One person's swagger lifted another's confidence. One woman's bright scarf became the spark for a dozen others to wear theirs with pride. Harlem's style traveled. It rippled into Chicago, Detroit, London, and Paris. It influenced painters, photographers, and filmmakers. It whispered into the threads of future revolutions, because to dress beautifully in a country that denied your worth was more than vanity. It was protest. To walk with confidence was political. To show joy was resistance. And in every feather, every heel, every flash of gold, Harlem reminded the world, we are not hiding, we are dazzling. By the early 1930s, the Renaissance began to dim. The Great Depression tightened its grip, silencing nightclubs, scattering artists, and draining the lifeblood from Harlem's cultural economy. Funding dried up, publishers backed away, the glamorous shine faded under the weight of poverty and hardship. But the flame didn't die, it changed shape. What had begun in brownstone basements and candlelit salons now lived in memory, in literature, in music, passed from hand to hand. The Harlem Renaissance had planted seeds deep, stubborn, and glowing beneath the surface of American life. Its writers became mentors, its musicians became legends, its painters became history's mirrors, and its message of dignity, expression, resistance, and pride never left. The poets of the Renaissance whispered through the verses of the civil rights era. You can hear Langston Hughes in the words of Maya Angelou, in the cadence of Nikki Giovanni. You can feel the defiance of Claude McKay in the speeches of Malcolm X and the rhythms of Gil Scott-Heron. The style, the music, the energy, it echoed in Motown, in soul, in jazz clubs and hip-hop ciphers. It danced across the stages of Broadway and spoke boldly from pages taught in classrooms across the world. Even today, Harlem remains a sacred space, a monument not of marble, but of memory. Walking through its streets is like walking through time. The Apollo Theater still stands, echoing with generations of voices. Murals, bookstores, and community gardens carry on the creative spark. The Renaissance proved something that no system, no prejudice, no silence could erase. That Black life in America is not something to pity or fear, but something to celebrate. It showed the world the power of culture to shape history, and it reminded a people long denied their voice that their voice was the story. Not a side note, not a footnote, the story. So as the night draws in and the music softens in the background, remember this. The Harlem Renaissance was not a moment. It was a declaration. And that declaration still echoes in every bold word, in every proud step, in every new creation born from truth. Because Harlem didn't just create a renaissance, it created a legacy, and that legacy lives on in all of us.
Life and ideas of Nikola Tesla, the enigmatic inventor whose brilliance once lit up the world and whose name today whispers through the wires of modern innovation. From harnessing the raw power of electricity to envisioning wireless communication long before it was possible, Tesla's imagination soared beyond the constraints of his time. But behind the genius was a man, lonely, eccentric, and tragically misunderstood. So before you get comfortable, as always, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, only if you enjoy our content. Let us know where you are watching from and what time it is for you. Sometimes our stories are too interesting, and we're working on some boring ones. It's time now to dim the lights, turn on a fan for some soft background noise, and let's cover what we have for tonight together. Nikola Tesla entered the world on a night that seemed torn between heaven and earth. It was July 10th, 1856, and a thunderstorm raged over the small mountain village of Smiljan, nestled in what was then the Austrian Empire, modern-day Croatia. As the wind howled and lightning split the sky, Tesla's mother labored by candlelight. A midwife, unnerved by the storm, whispered that this was a bad omen. But his mother, Duca Tesla, simply smiled and replied, "No, he will be a child of light." That single phrase would come to define him. Nikola's parents were opposites in many ways. His father, Milutin, was a stern Serbian Orthodox priest, a man of letters and logic. He wanted his son to follow a path of religion and language. His mother, by contrast, had no formal education, but she possessed a rare mechanical genius. She built household tools from scratch, invented devices to ease daily chores, and could recite entire epic poems from memory. Tesla would later credit her as the true source of his inventive mind. From a young age, Nikola stood apart. His memory was photographic. He could read a book once and quote it line by line. His imagination was boundless, so vivid that images would appear before his eyes like waking dreams. He began to see flashes of light and experience hallucinations. At times, the line between his mind and the outside world seemed to blur. He would later describe these moments not as madness, but as a gift, an ability to visualize entire machines with precision, down to the bolts and spinning gears, before ever lifting a tool. He was also deeply sensitive to patterns, sounds, and numbers. Tesla had peculiar habits that would follow him his entire life. He avoided touching hair, couldn't bear the sight of pearls, and was obsessed with the number 3. If he entered a building, he would walk around it 3 times. These weren't just quirks. They were part of a mind finely attuned to the rhythm of the universe. Though few understood him, the young boy from Smiljan was already dreaming of forces no one else could see, currents that moved through the earth and sky, waiting to be harnessed. The world had no idea what had just been born into its storm, but the future would soon feel the charge. As Nikola Tesla grew, so did the scope of his dreams. While other children played with toys or ran in fields, Tesla wandered through the world with questions. Why did birds migrate without sight? What made the stars shimmer? Could energy be drawn from the earth itself? He didn't just want answers. He wanted to feel the very pulse behind reality. He pursued education with relentless hunger. After completing primary school in Karlovac, Tesla enrolled in the Austrian Polytechnic School in Graz. It was there, surrounded by the ticking of gears and the buzz of generators, that his true vision began to form. In one lecture, he witnessed a demonstration of a direct current DC motor. It sparked in his mind a quiet rebellion. DC, the dominant electrical system of the time, felt inefficient to him, limited, crude. Tesla imagined something better. He envisioned a world powered by alternating current, AC, a system where energy flowed back and forth in waves, efficient and powerful, capable of traveling great distances with minimal loss. To his professors, the idea seemed absurd. But Tesla didn't argue. He simply stored the vision deep in his mind, where it grew, refined, evolved like a living machine waiting to be born. His studies, though brilliant, were interrupted. A mixture of illness, overwork, and financial difficulty forced him to leave Graz before graduation. He would later study in Prague, but never formally receive a degree. Still, Tesla was undeterred. Knowledge to him wasn't something granted. It was something pursued, like a current in the air, invisible yet everywhere. He spent long nights walking through forests, solving equations in his head. He could see turbines spinning in waterfalls, towers drawing power from lightning, devices floating information through the air. Long before the world imagined such things, Tesla could already feel them humming quietly in his mind. But genius, especially when unshaped by the world's rules, often goes unrecognized. His ideas were too strange, too far ahead of their time. Though he would go on to invent technologies that would shape the modern world, his early visions were mostly met with skepticism or silence. Still, Tesla walked on, guided not by approval, but by something deeper, a vision of the future no one else could yet see. A world not of wires and smoke, but of resonance, vibration, and light. In 1884, Nikola Tesla stepped off the boat in New York City with 4 cents in his pocket, a head full of inventions, and a letter of recommendation addressed to one man, Thomas Edison. The city was alive with chaos, bustling streets, the clang of iron, and the newborn hum of electric lights. Edison was the king of that world. Known as the Wizard of Menlo Park, he had already achieved legendary status as the inventor of the phonograph and the electric light bulb. His company, Edison Machine Works, was expanding rapidly, and Tesla was eager to join. The letter Tesla carried described him as a genius. Edison hired him immediately. At first, Tesla admired Edison's relentless work ethic. Both men were tireless. Both lived on little sleep. But that's where the similarities ended. Edison believed in trial and error, building and breaking until something worked. Tesla, by contrast, built his machines in the mind first, turning them in his imagination, solving every problem before touching a single tool. Tesla proposed a redesign of Edison's direct current DC electrical systems, an upgrade that would save time, energy, and money. According to Tesla, Edison laughed. Some say he promised $50,000 if Tesla could make his system more efficient. When Tesla did, Edison allegedly waved it off as a joke. "I don't understand American humor," Tesla said coldly. Disillusioned, Tesla left Edison's company. It was a turning point, both liberating and painful. He was jobless, penniless, and wandering the streets of Manhattan. For a time, he dug ditches to survive, his hands in the dirt while his mind remained in the clouds, sketching systems of wireless energy and spinning magnetic fields. Though their rivalry would become legendary, Tesla never truly hated Edison. He once described him as a hard-working man who lacked imagination. Edison, in turn, never grasped the depth of Tesla's vision, nor did he seem to care. But what Tesla did next would ignite a revolution that Edison couldn't stop. Out of rejection came resolve. Tesla was more determined than ever to bring his alternating current system to life, and in doing so, he would challenge the most powerful inventor of his era, not with money nor influence, but with light, logic, and the quiet fury of a dreamer scorned. After leaving Edison behind, Nikola Tesla was still a man with a vision, but no means. He spent a year laboring beneath the city he longed to electrify, digging trenches for underground wiring. But even in those dim, gritty days, Tesla's mind never stopped spinning, and soon fate would shift. In 1887, Tesla found backers who believed in his ideas. He established his own laboratory in Manhattan and began building his alternating current AC motors. Unlike Edison's direct current, Tesla's system used magnetic fields and rotating currents, able to transmit power efficiently over vast distances. It was elegant, powerful, scalable. Word of Tesla's breakthrough reached George Westinghouse, an industrialist and inventor who had already begun advocating for AC power. He saw in Tesla the missing piece to revolutionize electricity. In 1888, Westinghouse licensed Tesla's patents, offering funding, resources, and for the first time, recognition. But with progress came Edison, fearing the collapse of his DC empire, launching a campaign against AC. It wasn't just business. It was a war of ideas, and Edison was prepared to fight dirty. He began a public smear effort, staging gruesome demonstrations that showed animals being electrocuted with AC current, calling it dangerous and deadly. He even backed the invention of the electric chair using AC power, branding it as the execution current. Despite the theatrics, Tesla remained calm. He trusted the science. And when the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago awarded its massive lighting contract to Westinghouse and Tesla, AC was given its moment. That fair was a turning point. Over 100,000 electric bulbs lit the night with brilliance never before seen. Crowds gasped as machines buzzed, danced, and whirred, all powered by Tesla's alternating current. It was more than a victory. It was a glimpse into the future. Shortly after, Tesla's system was chosen to harness the energy of Niagara Falls, the first large-scale hydroelectric plant in history. For the first time, a city, Buffalo, New York, was powered by water and current alone. Tesla had won the war of currents, not with showmanship, but with vision and elegant design. But the spotlight, as always, began to shift elsewhere. And while the world cheered, Tesla quietly turned his mind to the next great challenge. He had lit the earth. Now he wondered, could he do the same for the sky? With alternating current now humming through cities and across rivers, Nikola Tesla might have stopped there. He had changed the world, but Tesla was never interested in standing still. His mind lived far beyond the present. While others saw wires and profits, Tesla saw resonance, energy in the air, a planet humming with untapped power. He believed the Earth itself could be a conductor. That energy could be transmitted wirelessly through the ground, through the sky, even across oceans. In the late 1890s, Tesla moved to Colorado Springs, a place with wide open skies and space enough for the strange experiments he dreamed of. He built a massive lab on the edge of town, crowned with a towering Tesla coil, and there, like a modern-day wizard, he began pulling lightning from the heavens. At night, locals could see great arcs of electricity leaping into the sky, lighting up the plains. Rumors spread. Was he controlling weather? Summoning forces he didn't understand? Even the ground around the lab would spark and crackle. Tesla had accidentally set the town's electrical station on fire more than once, but he was undeterred. In his journals, he wrote of contacting other planets, perhaps even Mars. He claimed to receive mysterious signals repeating patterns that hinted at intelligent life. Most dismissed him, but Tesla didn't mind. He wasn't trying to convince anyone. He envisioned a global system of towers broadcasting energy wirelessly, powering ships, lighting cities, and connecting voices across continents. Years before Marconi's radio or modern cell towers, Tesla was already imagining a wireless world. And yet, while Tesla dreamt of universal power, others were dreaming of something else: money. Investors wanted patents and control. They didn't understand or trust a system that couldn't be metered. Why fund a machine that would give energy away for free? In Colorado, Tesla's ideas crackled with possibility. His machines sang with resonance. His towers vibrated with dreams. But as always, he was working far ahead of his time in a world that preferred wires, walls, and ownership. Tesla returned to New York, not with a final invention, but with a vision. A map of an unseen network drawn in blue arcs and whispered frequencies. A future not yet built, but still waiting patiently in the silence between signals. When Nikola Tesla returned to New York from Colorado Springs, his mind was ablaze with a singular vision: to build the first true wireless power station. One that could transmit not just messages, but energy itself across the globe. With boldness in his eyes and blueprints in hand, Tesla approached one of the most powerful financiers in the world, J.P. Morgan. Tesla promised something extraordinary: a tower that could send wireless communication across the Atlantic. One that would connect continents and eventually provide free energy to the masses. Morgan agreed to fund it. In 1901, on the shores of Long Island's North Shore, the Wardenclyffe Tower began to rise. It stood 187 feet tall, with a deep shaft driven into the ground beneath to anchor the vibrations. At the time, it looked like the future: a giant metal spire, part cathedral, part lightning rod, crowned with a copper dome that hummed with possibility. But Tesla's intentions remained elusive. He spoke little of profits. He dreamed instead of a world where ships at sea could receive power from the air, where villages without wires could glow with light, where no one would ever pay for electricity again. When Morgan discovered that Tesla's true goal was to distribute energy freely, the support began to crumble. Morgan, ever the businessman, reportedly asked, "Where do I put the meter?" And when no meter could be found, the funding dried up. The world too was changing. Guglielmo Marconi, using Tesla's own patents, successfully sent the first transatlantic radio signal. The press hailed him. Tesla, by contrast, faded from headlines. He had once again been outmaneuvered, not by intelligence, but by pragmatism. Wardenclyffe Tower was never completed. The lab fell silent. The great transmitter stood unused for years, a monument to a dream that few understood. In 1917, it was dismantled for scrap, its towering frame sold for parts during wartime. Tesla watched his greatest project vanish into rust. But the idea behind it never died. Even as the tower fell, Tesla believed the world would one day come back to the concept, not for wealth, but for harmony. For a future where energy flows like wind, quiet and free, waiting only for someone brave enough to listen again to the silence between the sparks. By the 1920s, Nikola Tesla had become a ghost of the man who once lit the world's fairs and summoned lightning from the sky. His name was fading from the newspapers. His patents, once revolutionary, had been sold off, forgotten, or credited to others. And yet, in the heart of New York City, in a modest hotel room high above the streets, Tesla continued to dream. He moved frequently, often skipping rent, living alone in quiet, cluttered rooms. The world outside was entering the modern age. Cars rumbled down avenues, radios filled homes with music, and skyscrapers pierced the sky. Much of it was built on Tesla's ideas, but few remembered. Tesla had grown eccentric with age. He dressed immaculately in tailored suits and white gloves, even when he had no money to eat. He avoided shaking hands. He claimed numbers held a divine code, especially the number 3, which governed his daily rituals. If he touched a doorknob, he would do it 3 times. If he walked around a building, it had to be done 3 times. He wasn't just being strange. He was following patterns only he seemed able to see. His dearest companions were not people but pigeons. He fed them daily in Bryant Park, speaking softly to them as if they were old friends. One particular white dove held his heart. He said she visited him regularly, always finding his window, and that he loved her as one would love another human being. When she grew ill, he cared for her personally, and when she died, Tesla claimed he saw a beam of light flash from her eyes, a sign, he believed, that his life's work was complete. Though newspapers occasionally interviewed him, often printing his stranger claims about death rays or Martian messages, few truly listened. To many, he was just an odd old man in a dusty room, speaking of impossible things. But inside Tesla's mind, the universe was still alive with vibration and frequency. Even as the world dismissed him, he remained tethered to the future, not by profit, not by fame, but by an endless desire to understand the unseen forces that connect us all. And so, high above Manhattan, in the dim flicker of a hotel lamp, the last quiet chapters of a forgotten genius began to write themselves, one dream at a time. The end came softly for Nikola Tesla. No crowds, no speeches, no fanfare, just silence. On January 7, 1943, in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel, Tesla passed away alone. He was 86 years old. A maid found his lifeless body the next morning, lying peacefully in bed. The room was filled with papers, notebooks, small inventions, and the quiet hum of forgotten genius. He died with few possessions and even fewer visitors. His debts had mounted. His name had slipped from memory. Yet the ideas he left behind, scattered in drawers, scribbled in the margins of books, hidden in stacks of blueprints, would echo far beyond that quiet hotel room. When news of his death reached the government, the FBI quickly moved in. Agents seized his documents, fearing they contained secrets too dangerous to leave unguarded. Rumors swirled. Had Tesla truly invented a death ray? Had he discovered limitless energy? The truth was tangled somewhere in his notes, some complete, some cryptic, some lost to time. Despite the obscurity of his final years, the world slowly began to remember. Later that same year, the Supreme Court invalidated Marconi's claim to the invention of radio, finally restoring Tesla's patent and giving him long overdue credit. It was a quiet correction, buried in legal text, but it mattered. The man who once whispered of wireless worlds had been right all along. Nikola Tesla was buried in a simple service attended by a few loyal friends and admirers. There were no parades, no statues, but those who knew him, those who had once stood beside his towers or seen his mind in motion, understood the magnitude of what had been lost. He had lived not for riches, nor for applause, but for discovery, for the pursuit of the unknown, for the beauty hidden in patterns of light and sound. And though his final years were spent in solitude, Tesla had always said he was never truly alone. The universe was his companion, its vibrations, its frequencies, its endless mystery. He died quietly, yes, but somewhere, perhaps in the background hum of the world he helped create, his energy still lingers, soft, brilliant, eternal. Nikola Tesla may have died in silence, but the world he helped shape has never stopped speaking his name. Today, his fingerprints are everywhere in the buzzing power lines above us, the wireless signals that circle the globe, the machines that move without wires, and the technologies that hum quietly in our pockets. Alternating current, remote controls, radio waves, induction motors, neon lights, all owe a debt to his mind. He saw the earth not just as rock and soil, but as a giant conductor, a vessel of energy waiting to be tapped, shared, and understood. He believed the future would be built not with wires, but with resonance, not with domination, but with harmony. Though others profited from his ideas, Tesla never chased wealth. He died poor, but never bitter. In his heart, he believed that ideas belonged to the world, that knowledge was a form of light. And even if the world was slow to catch up, he knew the current would eventually flow. Decades after his death, his legacy began to rise again. Scientists, engineers, and historians reevaluated his work. Statues were erected, books were written, schools named after him. And in the 21st century, his name found new life, etched in electric cars, in energy labs, in the minds of those who look at the stars and wonder, what if? But perhaps the truest legacy of Nikola Tesla is not a single invention or a tower or a patent. It is the example he left us of a mind that dared to dream far beyond the limits of its time, of a man who walked alone, not for lack of company, but because his path had never been walked before. Tesla taught us that the future belongs to the dreamers, the quiet thinkers, the ones lost in thought while the world hurries by, often carrying within them the sparks that will one day light the way for us all. So tonight, as you drift into sleep and the noise of the day fades away, remember this: somewhere between silence and electricity, between science and wonder, the spirit of Nikola Tesla still hums softly, timeless, invisible, and waiting to be heard. Long ago, on the shimmering edge of the Mediterranean Sea, a city rose from vision. Its name was Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great around 331 BCE. Though Alexander would die young and never see the city completed, his dream lingered in its marble streets and sea-swept harbors. After Alexander's death, one of his generals, Ptolemy I Soter, took control of Egypt. He made Alexandria his capital, and under his rule, the city blossomed. More than just a center of trade or politics, it became something rare, a place devoted to learning. Ptolemy, influenced by Greek philosophy and the teachings of Aristotle, envisioned a home for all the world's knowledge, not just a collection of scrolls, but a sanctuary of wisdom, a place where the great questions of life, the cosmos, and human existence could be asked quietly, patiently, without fear. Thus, the dream of the Library of Alexandria was born. It began not with stone walls or columns, but with an idea that knowledge should not be hoarded or hidden, but gathered and shared. The library would be part of a larger institution, the Mauseon, a place dedicated to the muses, goddesses of inspiration in the arts. Together, they would become the heartbeat of Alexandria's intellect. The goal was simple, yet impossibly ambitious: to collect every book, every scroll, every fragment of thought in every language from every land. Agents were sent across the world to acquire manuscripts. Ships entering Alexandria's port were searched and their books copied, sometimes kept. The city became a beacon, drawing scholars, poets, mathematicians, and philosophers from Greece, India, Mesopotamia, and beyond. No one knew how much knowledge the human mind could hold, but in Alexandria, they intended to find out. It is said that the first librarians walked through columns lined with papyrus scrolls, their sandals echoing in vaulted halls. They whispered in Greek, in Egyptian, in languages now lost to time. And in those moments, for the first time in history, humanity began to see itself not as scattered tribes or empires, but as a species capable of learning together. The Library of Alexandria did not begin as a building. It began as a flame that would burn bright and fragile at the heart of the ancient world. The Library of Alexandria was not built to house mere stories. It was built to collect the knowledge of the world, every insight, every theory, every poem and prophecy ever written. It was humanity's first attempt to hold in one place the sum of its own understanding. But how does one begin to gather the thoughts of an entire civilization? Under the Ptolemies, especially Ptolemy II, the collection effort became relentless. Agents and scholars were dispatched far and wide, to Athens, to Babylon, to Carthage, and India. Wherever scrolls could be found, they were copied or acquired. Alexandria's docks became a gateway not just for goods, but for ideas. Ships that entered the harbor were required to surrender any books they carried. The originals were kept, copies returned to the owners. The ambition was clear. Nothing was too obscure or too sacred to be included. Estimates of the collection vary wildly. Some say the library held 40,000 scrolls. Others claim over 400,000. But the true number is less important than the spirit behind it. These weren't just shelves of paper, they were voices. Scrolls of science, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, literature, politics, religion, texts in Egyptian, Sanskrit, Persian, Hebrew, and dozens of other tongues. The library wasn't just Greek, it was global. Among its treasures were early texts on astronomy from Mesopotamia and mathematical principles from India, surgical techniques from Egypt, and philosophical dialogues from Athens. It is said the lost plays of Aeschylus were once kept there, along with ancient maps of the stars, and perhaps even older writings now lost to time. But the library was more than a warehouse of words. Every scroll was carefully copied, translated, and preserved by scribes and scholars. The library didn't just keep information, it refined it. Scholars engaged with these texts, challenged them, expanded upon them. Imagine a place where a student could read the Vedas, consult Aristotle, study Babylonian star charts, and then discuss it all over dinner with the finest minds of the age. That was Alexandria. Each scroll carried the echo of another time, another place, another mind. And within those walls, for a brief moment in history, humanity tried to listen to them all. It was not a collection. It was a conversation centuries long, ever growing, and breathtakingly alive. The Library of Alexandria was never just a building filled with scrolls. It was a living, breathing world of minds in motion. Attached to the library was the Mauseon, a sanctuary dedicated to the muses, the divine inspirations behind music, poetry, science, and learning. This was more than symbolic. The Mauseon functioned much like a modern university or research institute. It provided housing, food, and stipends for scholars from across the known world. Here, thinkers were not burdened by survival. They were free to read, write, debate, and explore ideas without limit. They lived within the grounds among gardens, lecture halls, laboratories, and observatories. It was a quiet place, but not a silent one. The halls were filled with the gentle rustle of scrolls, the scratch of pens on parchment, and the soft murmur of conversation, Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, and others blending into a symphony of thought. The scholars who walked these halls were some of the greatest minds in history. Euclid, the father of geometry, laid the foundation of mathematical reasoning that still guides classrooms today. Eratosthenes, the head librarian, used shadows and sticks to calculate the circumference of the earth, coming remarkably close to the actual number. Herophilos dissected human bodies, mapping the nervous system and describing the brain as the seat of thought centuries before such ideas became accepted. And Aristarchus of Samos proposed a heliocentric model of the universe, suggesting that the earth revolved around the sun, an idea the world would not embrace until long after his death. Within the library and Mauseon, there were no strict lines between disciplines. Philosophy blended with science, mathematics inspired poetry, medicine drew upon astronomy. Knowledge was not divided, it was interconnected like the stars above or the roots of a tree. This environment created something rare, not just the preservation of knowledge, but the acceleration of it. Here, questions were not feared, they were welcomed. Truth was not declared, it was pursued. And wisdom was not owned, it was shared. In these marble chambers and vine-covered courtyards, the human mind was allowed to stretch, to wander, to wonder. And for a little while in the bright heart of Alexandria, the world seemed to remember what it meant to seek truth without fear. For years, the Library of Alexandria stood as a symbol of light in a world still shadowed by ignorance. But no light, however bright, is immune to the winds of politics and war. In 48 BCE, the city of Alexandria found itself caught in conflict. Julius Caesar, drawn into a dynastic struggle between Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII, arrived with Roman legions to settle the chaos when hostilities erupted near the harbor. Caesar, under siege, ordered the docks set ablaze to prevent enemy ships from surrounding him. What happened next is a matter of debate, but the flames leapt from the wooden piers to nearby buildings, and some accounts suggest that the fire spread to warehouses storing scrolls from the library. If true, it may have been one of the first devastating blows to the library's vast collection. Was it the main library that burned, or simply an annex, a storage facility along the harbor? Historians cannot agree. Some ancient sources claim tens of thousands of scrolls were lost in the blaze. Others suggest the damage was partial, not total. And yet the very idea that centuries of knowledge vanished in a single night of fire is almost too tragic to comprehend. Imagine it. Scrolls on ancient medicine destroyed before they could heal. Star charts reduced to ash. Theories of the cosmos, of biology, of philosophy, each one erased in the blink of a flame. And yet the fire was not just physical. In the years that followed, the library faced more than smoke. Political instability, regime changes, and shifting priorities slowly chipped away at its support. Funding dwindled. Scholars moved on. The guardians of the world's wisdom began to thin. But even in the face of loss, the library endured. If not in walls, then in spirit. Some scrolls survived. Some scholars remained. The dream still flickered. Destruction, after all, is never just one moment. It is a long, slow unraveling. And in Alexandria, the fire may have started with Caesar's torches, but it would take centuries to finish what that first spark began. Still, within the ashes, something ancient lingered. The belief that knowledge once lit can never be fully extinguished. Though the fire in Caesar's time may have damaged the Library of Alexandria, the dream it embodied did not vanish overnight. Alexandria remained a city of scholars, and the thirst for knowledge endured. Out of necessity and hope, a second library rose, one not as grand as the original, but still sacred. This new library found its home in the Serapeum, a magnificent temple dedicated to Serapis, a Greco-Egyptian god of wisdom, healing, and light. The Serapeum stood on a hill above the city, crowned with statues, columns, and quiet courtyards. Here, within the temple's cool stone chambers, thousands of scrolls were housed. Copies, perhaps, of those once held in the great library, or new works added by later generations of thinkers. The Serapeum became a continuation of the original vision. It preserved the texts that remained and provided a place for scholars to read, teach, and imagine. It was, in essence, the library's second life. But the world outside was changing. Alexandria, once the jewel of Egypt, found itself drawn deeper into the Roman Empire. Emperors came and went, interests shifted, and science gave way to politics. The city's resources were stretched, and public support for scholarly pursuits slowly waned. And yet the second library endured. Even as the original Museon fell silent, students still gathered under the marble archways of the Serapeum. They read by lamplight, debated under olive trees, and shared ideas that echoed faintly from the golden age of the past. But this fragile continuation was not to last forever. By the 4th century CE, a new force had begun to reshape the ancient world, the rise of Christianity. The once pagan temples, including the Serapeum, became targets in a sweeping movement to redefine spiritual and cultural authority. In 391 CE, under the orders of Emperor Theodosius I, the Serapeum was attacked and destroyed. Whether scrolls still remained there at that time is unknown. Some say they had already been moved. Others believe they perished with the building. All that is certain is this: another chapter of Alexandria's legacy closed in smoke and silence. But even in ruin, the idea lived on. Because dreams like these, once shared across generations, do not end with fire. They linger, waiting to be reborn. As the centuries turned, Alexandria stood at the crossroads of shifting empires and rising faiths. The ancient city, once crowned by marble columns and golden light, slowly changed under the weight of new beliefs, new rulers, and new identities. The Roman Empire had grown vast and unstable. Its focus drifted from Alexandria to Rome and eventually to Constantinople. The old institutions of learning, once nourished by royal support, were left to fade. The once vibrant Mauseion had become quiet, its gardens overgrown, its scrolls scattered or neglected. And while the library's physical walls crumbled, so too did the world around it. By the 4th century, the Roman Empire embraced Christianity, first with tolerance and then with dominance. What had once been a sprawling tapestry of gods and philosophies became a single path, guided by church doctrine. Pagan temples, once respected as centers of wisdom, were rebranded as symbols of heresy and superstition. In this climate, the library's fate grew darker. In 391 CE, Emperor Theodosius I issued a decree. All pagan temples were to be closed. In Alexandria, this edict turned into violence. Christian mobs led by Bishop Theophilus descended upon the Serapeum. The temple was stormed, statues shattered, and what remained of the second library, if anything still survived, was likely lost in the chaos. Some accounts speak of scrolls burned in the streets. Others claim the library's contents had already vanished long before the destruction. Truth and legend blur here, as they often do when fire and faith collide. What is certain is that the torch of knowledge, once so carefully guarded, was now a flicker in the wind.